Well, welcome everyone to another engaGE24 podcast. And aren't you looking smart today, Peter? You're wearing a suit. What's happened?
No, I know. It is confusing for everyone, isn't it?
Everyone.
Well, I guess I'm going to watch cricket tonight, and so that means I have to dress smartly for
Who's
it.
playing?
Middlesex and Somerset.
Ah, very good, very good. And you went to watch the cricket the other week. What was the result?
Middlesex lost comprehensively.
Who do you support?
Middlesex.
Oh, that's quite funny, isn't it?
Well, I think when you've been supporting them for 20 years and they've been terrible almost every year, the joke starts to wear off a bit.
We're a bit thin, yeah. Well, fair enough.
Anyway.
Well, I'm going to the cricket later on in the summer, but that'll be probably after the election's taken place.
Well, unless we are about to talk about John Major's love of cricket, I feel like we probably ought to relate this a bit more directly to the general election.
We should. So here we are. We're now a couple of weeks in, and do you know what? Let's talk about D-Day.
Oh, gosh,
can we talk about D-Day quickly?
Disaster.
I don't want to spend too long on it, but yes. Yeah, so, what was your when you found out what had happened? What was your instinctive reaction? Maybe just for those watching, those listening to this podcast, just for a bit of context. So we had the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. That's when the Allied forces on the 6th of June 1944 crossed the Channel to launch the invasion of France, the opening of a second front, which then ultimately led to the end and the defeat of Nazi Germany. It was a huge moment. British troops, Canadian troops, American troops, and other members of the Commonwealth were involved. And we have to recognise that because it's the 80th anniversary, many of those surviving veterans, this will be their last one, possibly, or there won't be many more, humanly speaking. And our Prime Minister naturally went to France to take part in some of the events to mark the anniversary, but he left early. And that caused a huge storm, understandably. So, yeah, that's the background. What was your reaction?
I think it's difficult to see it as anything other than astonishingly naive to not go to the whole event. I know that Rishi Sunak's event was he went to the British part of the day, but also even that in and of itself is a kind of bit of a commentary on how he views our alliances. I would have said in that obviously it was not just the British for whom D-Day is a big thing, but it was the Americans and it was the French as well. Absolute comms disaster. It will be all that people remember this campaign for, apart from him getting wet in the rain and all the other disasters. So it's not really going to plan for the Conservatives so far.
And you have to say as well, it really says something about a campaign when you don't really need to look at what the opposition are saying about you because you're just making unforced errors yourself.
Yes, completely. Although speaking of memorable campaigns, I wonder whether we ought to jazz up our set a bit. And why are we not at Thorpe Park as we do this latest podcast episode? Do you want to explain?
Yes, I would love to. Yeah, so you're referencing Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, who has, I think, adopted a very savvy and deliberate media strategy so far to campaigning in this general election. He knows that in order to get cut through and to compete with the two bigger parties, Labour and the Conservatives, then he needs to do incredibly eye-catching stunts. It was a very similar strategy that was adopted by Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party. I think it was 2016 in the Holyrood elections. Eye-catching stunts to really help make sure she captured headlines in the newspapers and got good images for the broadcasters. And so Ed Davey popped along to Thorpe Park. Have you been to Thorpe Park?
No.
Would you like theme parks? You'd not strike me as a theme park kind of guy.
No, not massively. I had a traumatic experience when I was 6 years old on a roller coaster.
What happened?
Well, I didn't know what a roller coaster was, and I saw these photos in the leaflet where it looked like a train, and so I assumed it was a train. And then, you know those sort of photographs at the end where they kind of take the photos and everyone's got their hands in the air.
Yes.
You couldn't actually see me because
you'd fallen off.
Well, no, because I was in the fetal position, like in the bottom of the chair. So I've never really liked roller coasters since then.
To be fair, that I can understand that. Okay, but so Ed Davey goes to Thorpe Park and he goes on a big ride and he goes on with some of his sort of shadow spokespeople and all of that kind of stuff. And the whole point here is that actually he's doing that but to earn a hearing, and that then allows him to speak more seriously about things like social care and about what it's been like to be a carer for his son who's got a very severe disability and the impact that's had on the family. And I to be honest, what else can he do? Because no one really knows Ed Davey, and so he's got to do something to grab the headlines.
Well, I think the other thing as well is the Liberal Democrats are not actually looking to compete with Labour. They are. I mean, they have, for a long time now, they have primarily achieved good results through tactical voting.
Yeah.
And all Ed Davey needs to do is make the Liberal Democrats cut through so that people know we're an alternative to the Conservatives, and then in the relevant parts of the country, people will vote Liberal Democrat.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that he necessarily even needs to explain some of his policies. He just needs to be known who he is. Although I did very much enjoy the video I saw this morning of him trying to explain why Britain should rejoin the single market whilst he was riding with teacups.
I saw that. Well, I mean, I forgive me for this, but yes, I would quite like to hear him say more on that particular policy, because arguably that was probably the most controversial element of the Liberal Democrat manifesto. But we're going to come on to manifestos. Just coming back to the campaign. So we've talked about Rishi Sunak and D-Day, that being a disaster. We've talked about Ed Davey cutting through. What about Keir Starmer and the Labour Party? What's your sort of assessment on the approach that they're taking so far?
I think for Labour, they just need to try to avoid any D-Day-esque disasters. I'm not sure that there's necessarily that much enthusiasm for Labour's plan, but again, they are capitalising on the fact that they are not the Conservatives.
Yeah.
And so they just need to not destroy that. If they are seen to be a steady pair of hands, then they will come through with the most astounding majority, potentially the biggest one we've ever seen. So I think it's probably safety first for them. Do you have any other takes on it?
No, that would be exactly my take. I mean, they call it the Ming vase strategy. You know, you've got this precious vase, and so the idea is you've just got to keep it upright and not make any unforced errors. Yeah. And so that does lead to a kind of safety first kind of campaign. Of course, the other element, the disruptive element into this election campaign, is the news that Nigel Farage is going to stand in Clacton for Parliament. And so he has stood before. He's not managed to be elected to the UK Parliament. What's your sort of read on the impact you think that will have on this election campaign?
Again, it is another disaster for the Conservative Party. So the Conservatives were very worried that Farage might stand because it would give such a boost to reform. Farage has, of course, now also taken over the leadership of reform, whereas it was Richard Tice before him. Farage is... I guess he is, again, someone who cuts through. I mean, you can probably detect from the way I'm speaking, I am not a fan of him.
You're not?
No, okay. Strangely not. And I suspect that you probably are not either.
I had my picture taken with him the day after the Brexit referendum. And that is because for a long time, one of his favourite watering holes, if I can put it like that, is the Marquis of Granby pub, which is, of course, very near Kerr's office. And I just happened to be going for a stroll that day with a friend. And then there he was. And so I kind of lost my PR mind for a moment. And I had a picture with him. And then I thought, gosh, I not only am I definitely not using it for Kerr because Kerr is politically neutral, but also I'm not sure I want to put this anywhere on my socials either. So now I've just got a random picture of me and Nigel Farage on my phone. Yeah. So I made it my wallpaper for a month.
I mean, again, Farage is a disruptor, isn't he? I think the thing with Reform, who are again being used primarily as a protest vote as much as anything else, is they can say basically whatever they like.
Yes, that's true, yeah.
Because there's no chance that they're going to win the election.
No.
People are using them to express their disaffection and disappointment with the Tory party. And so they can come out with all kinds of right-wing things if they want to, in full knowledge they would never have to do any of them. And then that will mean, again, probably for the Conservatives, they are going to hemorrhage votes in particular areas of the country to that party.
And hence the narrative then developing and growing, which is actually Nigel Farage in the messaging that he was landing in the 7-way leader debate, or nearly leader debate, that took place just recently. The messaging he was landing was all about, who do you want to be the opposition to Labour? And I found that absolutely fascinating. It's inconceivable that 5 years ago you would have had Reform, or the incarnation of the Brexit Party, whichever it was back then, arguing that talking in such a language, because that was just not on the cards. But it shows you that the narrative after Farage said he was standing was all about how quickly before Reform are polling more than the Conservative Party. And the other thing that I think we should just talk about is that the data out suggests that partly what's driving the polling position of Reform, which is around 17-18% in some of the polls, is the fact that 18 to 24-year-olds, there's a significant proportion of 18 to 24-year-olds who are saying, yeah, they like their policies, they'd vote for them. So this narrative that in this country, young people always vote left and old people always vote right, I don't think that is holding water anymore.
I guess it will be borne out when we come to election day. I think it's always possible to overstate the impact of a party like Reform. They will probably end up with a couple of seats at best. I think the other thing which the last few days has really exposed is the difficulties, and this is not just a criticism of Reform, the difficulties for any new-ish party trying to establish itself, because you don't have in place all the processes.
No
game. Well, yeah, and so when you end up with candidates like the one this week who said that Britain shouldn't have fought the Nazis in World War II, you think, goodness me, some of the people who are being allowed to stand here are pretty crazy.
I got a question for you then again, also about the campaign so far. Yeah. So I heard someone speculate that from I nearly said a sister podcast, but that is a bold claim. So one of the co-hosts of The Rest is History, which I should just clarify is absolutely not a sister podcast. The problem is, Peter, that's the lingo that they use on their podcast, and they're always talking about their sister podcast over here and their sister podcast over here. And I want to own that. I want to be part of that. But I should clarify, the Rest is History, very separate, not a sister podcast to engaGE24. We're way more popular than they are.
They must get about 1,000 times the viewing figures that we get. But
we're on a journey. Anyway, he was actually on another sister podcast, which is one of Matt Chorley's show from Times Radio.
Okay.
And he was talking about his favourite elections. And he was saying, look, everybody's already made their mind up. So election campaigns don't actually change anybody's mind. Most people have already made their minds up. Now, this is what he was postulating. And I suppose what he was then going into was the Ed Davey approach is enlivening what is an incredibly dull campaign from his point of view.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, okay, so from a Christian perspective, is a safety first, dull, keep everything, play it safe, versus a kind of, we're going to get cut through, we're going to do fun stunts, we're going to grab the headlines and try to get some really good pictures in the press. Like, is there a particularly Christian angle on the kind of election campaign that we would want to see?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Maybe there's not an answer.
Well, no, I think that's a fascinating question. I think it's somewhat depressing that the Liberal Democrat strategy is not to say so much about the policies which they want to enact. And as amusing as it might be, kind of Ed Davey falling off a paddleboard. That is not the way to determine whether someone would run a good government or not, is it?
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so you think actually that I wonder whether, if you think about it from a Christian point of view, that there's absolutely room for laughter. There's room for joy. Ecclesiastes talks a lot about that. Big theme in Ecclesiastes. I remember a friend actually once asked me, are there any examples of Jesus laughing in the Bible?
I think Jesus tells funny stories. Right. So when he is talking about the specks and planks in the eye, he is exaggerating to make people laugh. So I absolutely think that that Jesus would have laughed.
And so then we've got this kind of this conclusion then that we seem to be coming to is a Christian perspective on the kind of election campaign that we want to see. Three things. One, that actually some kind of laughter and sort of stunts can actually be a good thing, and can also then help you to think about a serious thing. So I found that I paid far more attention to Ed Davey's launch video on the social care issue and being a carer, for example. I think one of the reasons I watched that with as much interest as I did is because I did think, who is this guy who's charging around the country, falling off paddle boards, going on theme park rides and so on and so forth. Then the second element is that politics is serious, and these are candidates putting themselves forward for one of the most important jobs in the country. And so you do want to see a genuine, serious discussion about policy taking place. So you've got those two things. The third element would be you want this campaign to be conducted where we're able to disagree with one another and we do not resort to acts of violence like throwing stones, even if we find the candidate objectionable.
Or throwing milkshakes.
And both have happened to Nigel Farage, and I'm sure other candidates have experienced at least low-level forms of harassment and intimidation. And what has been encouraging, I think, is the way that people who vehemently oppose Nigel Farage and all he stands for have come out publicly to defend him. That's something that, from a Christian perspective, you've got to say that is an important thing in this kind of debate. Not only that candidates are protected, but also that people, even if you disagree, that you're able to respect and defend one another's rights to campaign in safety.
I think when you were speaking there, I was trying to assemble my thoughts in terms of what I would want to see in an election campaign. I came up with 3 points.
3 rival points.
They all begin with P.
So
I think I've got one up on you so far.
Oh my goodness! And you've got a Bible there as well. You're wearing a nicer
where is
suit.
Yours today?
We get it, Peter. You're better than me. All fine. What are your 3 P points?
Oh dear. No, my points were.
Peter. I'm kidding. That's a good one, Isaac?
They were policies, principles, and people. Okay.
That's pretty good.
So in terms of policies, we want to see sort of wise, good ideas which will actually benefit our country. We want to see good government, which promotes good and restrains evil. Principles. We don't just want to see a load of promises being made which parties have no intention of keeping. We don't just want to sort of see political grabs, but we want to see our politicians being true to what they actually believe. And I think we've talked before in previous episodes how actually that can be a really helpful thing to know where a politician stands and to know that they're not just going to compromise their convictions. And the third was putting people first. Again, something we've talked about in the past. There's a lot of rhetoric which is thrown around in elections, and actually one of the things which I thought was quite helpful in the debates was sometimes questions being asked from people in the audience telling their own stories, and the election, probably above all, is about helping people to flourish. It is about promoting the common good and trying to transform people's lives. And that is, again, our slogan at CARE, politics renewed, yes, lives transformed. So those were the 3 things I came up with.
It's brilliant. And what you've done there also is you've guaranteed that you'll get a nice YouTube short clip
not
created off that.
I think I spoke for too long.
It's absolutely deliberate. I can tell your game. Very good. Well, I've actually come up with 4 Ps.
What's your 4th one?
Politics. So you had policies, principles, and people, but I just want to add in the 4th, politics, which is to say, politics, we must always remember, is ultimately about people coming together to decide laws, legislation that govern common life in a society. And so therefore politics is the 4th P that I think was maybe missing. And there's my social media clip.
Go for it.
Yeah, no, there we go. So it's really helpful. I think you touched on the debate there. So I just want to let's just talk about the debate because we've now had the first leader debate between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. We've had a 7-way debate between senior representatives from more political parties, so Lib Dems, Reform, Labour, Conservative, Green as well, and I think Plaid Cymru from Wales too. Now, let's just talk about Starmer versus Sunak, because my reflection on that was basically, lots that I could say. I am not convinced that these debates are actually, that format that was employed for that debate was particularly helpful. I agree with you that it was good to hear questions from the audience, but the format of 45 seconds in order to respond and then a bit of an exchange just encourages the kind of zinger approach where what you're really trying to do is land your main key messages rather than a substantive interrogation of the policy positions that you are taking. The unedifying spectacle of 2 grown men, one in 61 and one in his late 40s or mid 40s, talking over each other relentlessly, reflects badly on everybody. And these are candidates to be Prime Minister. And I also found the whole kind of adversarial context of it, I would far rather have seen, in previous elections, they've done like a Jeremy Paxman 1-to-1 interview where you're grilled on where you're coming from for 45 minutes and then you take questions from the audience. I would have have preferred. Now, maybe other broadcasters will adopt that format, but I felt a bit let down by that first format. And I got to be honest with you, I found it very stressful watching, just simply because of the way that they talked over each other.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with any of that. I think the format is set up for you to try and get your soundbite, isn't it? It's like the kind of Twitter approach to debating.
Right.
You've got 280 characters, or in this instance, 45 seconds, or maybe even a yes or no question. So how on earth are you supposed to be getting into the nuances of stuff? It's almost ironic, I thought, that we always say Prime Minister's Questions is a terrible format. And yet you probably get twice as long to answer the question in that format.
It's not like Mr. Speaker is going, right, it's your 45 seconds up.
Yeah.
You can take longer if you need it.
Yeah, so I do agree with you on that front. I sort of feel like I quite enjoyed watching it, but I almost enjoyed watching it as if I was watching a football match, where you're kind of getting one team attacking the other one defending. It was sort of, in terms of trying to understand better what's going to happen in terms of different policies from different parties, it's a complete disaster. But I sort of I did quite enjoy it from a spectator point of view.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I mean, I think with the debate that involved 7 people, I think first of all, the problem with all of those kind of formats is it's just too many people, and so you never really feel like you're getting a proper insight into, say, some of the parties that have less media profile, that less of a platform. You have Nigel Farage, and then you've got Angela Rayner and Penny Mordaunt representing the Conservatives, and Angela Rayner, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. At the opposite ends of the table, you also had Stephen Flynn from the Scottish National Party, and you had the leader of the Plaid Cymru as well. And I'm kind of like, yes, a general election does impact every part of the United Kingdom, but it also feels strange when you've got a representative of a party that is championing Scottish independence to kind of, commenting on sometimes legislation and legislative areas. The competency lies with Westminster, not with the Scottish Parliament. So that whole dynamic as well, I don't know what the answer is. You've got to include them, and that's democratically acceptable to do so. But can we come up with another format where perhaps parties who represent, devolved institutions kind of have their own debate?
Well, that would make vastly more sense to me. I mean, I remember watching I think it must have been 2015, when it was general election, and thinking that Nicola Sturgeon was the best performer. I mean, I remember on Twitter, everyone being like, why can't I vote for her?
Yeah, I remember that.
It is a bit absurd, isn't it?
I think so. And again, I didn't feel like I learned anything.
Yeah.
Again, I thought it was set up, you had the attack lines, you had the parties landed their messages, Penny Mordaunt landing the tax claim that Labour will increase your taxes, Labour rebutting that, I think, more strongly and effectively than Keir Starmer managed to, saying that is simply not true, and that Rishi Sunak actually is lying about that. So that, in one sense, is helpful, I suppose, on a small level, but it's far more about the spectacle. It's far more designed for the social media clips that will come out afterwards. Like, where is the substantive conversation about policy?
So, from a Christian point of view,
right,
what would be your analysis watching those two debates as a Christian?
Well, I think it reflects something of the lack of civility in our debates. I thought it was good at the end of the leader debate between Starmer and Sunak. Starmer made the move towards Sunak to shake his hand. I wrote a blog for our engaGE24 website, engaGE24.org.uk, where I said what I would have liked to have seen is questions by the host, the moderator, where they did this in the American debates in 2016, I think, effectively, where you say to one of them, name one quality in your opponent that you actually like and that you admire. And that's not just foppy. You're not just doing that for the cameras. That actually is an important principle, that you want to encourage and model a better and higher form of civility. So as a Christian, I want to look at these kind of debates, and I want to hear a willingness on both parts to listen. I want to hear a willingness on both parts to accept that they don't have all the answers. And my goodness, an election campaign is not designed to facilitate that kind of humility. Instead, all of the parties have to give the impression all of the time that they've got every answer to every question that you could possibly possibly imagine on every policy ever. And it's just nonsense. Of course they don't. Why can't we be honest and say, when it comes to things like net zero, when it comes to things like carbon emissions, when it comes to things like immigration and defence and so on, that we're not infallible, that we don't know the future, and that these are massively complex policy areas, and we are not always sure what the right solutions are. Why can't we say that?
In fairness to Rishi Sunak, in his interview with Nick Robinson this week, he did take more of that approach, where he recognised that actually things had not always got better.
Yes.
And I think
the honesty.
Well, yes, I think I have, like you, I have far more respect for that approach.
Interestingly, that's a one-to-one approach. That one-to-one interview, isn't that interesting? That format, I agree. I watched that as well. I found it far more insightful. I look forward now to watching the ones with the subsequent leaders as well.
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely is a far better way of because it's less combative, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
One of the things Rishi Sunak said when he came to office was that he would be prepared to have difficult conversations and that he wouldn't just promise everything. And whether or not he is held to that approach, I think looking to be honest with the public and say you can't actually have everything and we are going to have to make choices, I would much rather see that as an approach for running an election campaign than the sort of promise the earth Boris Johnson kind of style of actually we can do whatever we like. But I guess we're now starting to get into the territory of talking about manifestos, aren't we?
Yes.
So why do you think manifestos are important?
They're important because that is the document that the political party is saying, this is what we will do if we hold power, if we're elected into high office. And it's a means by which we can hold our local MPs to account as well. And I think it also gives us a real sense of what will they actually do with the power when they have it. And so, for example, as a Christian, I want to go to these manifestos, and it's my formal and official opportunity to understand for what will the Labour Party do? What are they committed to? And so I can approach it through the lens of what in this manifesto can I connect with, and what do I want to challenge, because I think it disagrees with principles that I find in God's word. So this is a set piece moment in an election campaign. And, when politics is working at its best, then a political party, if they're elected on their manifesto, they will implement that manifesto. And that then becomes the focus for the next 5 years. And so this is a significant document. And so as a Christian, this is one of the best and easiest ways I can determine what are the policies and the principles, to use two of your three Ps, that are being put forward by the people. There's the third one, who want to stand and be elected to high office. Yeah. What do you think?
I think it is really important that we know what a party will do and we hold them to account for it. I think if political parties make the promises, then they need to keep their promises. And I guess as Christians, that would be something which we believe as well. So we follow a God who keeps his promises, a God who made a covenant with Abraham and who has kept that covenant. That idea of a binding promise is there throughout the biblical narrative. And I guess Jesus sort of talked about like letting your yes be yes. And so I think it's a really important thing that people do not just promise the earth, but actually promise what they will deliver. And I also think that, and maybe we've seen this more in this election than in past ones, when governments don't keep their promises, they are likely to be held accountable for it by the people. And you look back at the Conservative manifesto in 2019 and completely, admittedly, this has all come within the context of the world has gone mad with a pandemic and with war and all this kind of stuff. But there are lots of things which they said they would do, which they haven't done,
and they're now repeating in their latest manifesto for the 2024 election.
And I guess another example would be you look back at the Lib Dems 2010. We're going to get rid of tuition fees. Hang on, now we're in coalition, we're going to treble them. Well, the Lib Dems were almost wiped out as a result. So I think at least there is a sign there that people do hold politicians to account for what they have said. But it's absolutely right that parties should not promise more than they can deliver.
And if you think about a manifesto, then surely we have a biblical basis for a manifesto in the Sermon on the Mount, for example, which has often been called the manifesto of the kingdom of God. And I think that's a very helpful way of thinking about it, that here is how a citizen of that kingdom will live. These are the characteristics and the qualities that they will then evidence. And so, we have that biblical basis that we can look to and go, this is probably a good thing.
That's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought of it like that. I guess Jesus sort of spells out what his ministry is going to be all about in Nazareth Manifesto, doesn't he?
That's right, exactly right.
Obviously, those are terms people have later attached to it in Luke chapter 4. So I've got it open here. So Jesus goes back to prophecy from Isaiah where he says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." So Jesus says, look, this is about me, this is what I'm going to do. But then he does it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when John the Baptist asks, look, are you the Messiah? Jesus is able to say, well, look, I've done this and this and this. So that's a really interesting point. I've not considered that before.
Yeah. And so obviously, we've got our election website, engaGE24.org.uk. What are we going to be doing to help Christians and the UK church engage with the manifestos?
Well, as each manifesto is published, we will be assessing all the key things from all the areas in it. So we're not just going to focus on a kind of few issues which Christians would care about. We're going to try and encompass the whole thing. And we're going to be bringing out the key points which someone might need to know on the economy or on education or on energy and environment or foreign policy. So you don't need to wade through the 100+ pages which were in the Lib Dem manifesto, for instance, and you can just come to our page where we'll have stuff which you can probably scroll through in a couple of minutes.
I can hear celebrations going on up and down the country as Christians have listened to you, watched this, and are going, wow, brilliant. I don't need to read the manifestos. I can instead read CARE's incredibly brilliant summary of the key points on engaGE24.org.uk. That's fantastic. And so we're going to, as you say, we're going to be doing that as the manifestos are published. And as we look forward to the remaining weeks of this election campaign, what would be one thing that you are especially looking forward to? And what would be one thing that you are sort of most afraid of?
Oh, gosh.
I know, I put you on the spot here.
You have. I wasn't expecting that.
It's what I'm like, throw me a curveball and I will throw one right back at you.
Let me take the second question first.
Yeah.
I don't think it is ever healthy for a democracy to end up in a situation where one party has so much power it can basically do whatever it likes.
Right.
And I think that goes in whichever direction. Yeah. And it makes me nervous when I see reports of what will be a complete wipeout currently.
Yeah. Especially as under the British system, you need a strong opposition. That's how it's supposed to work.
That's exactly
it. It's designed to give you a majority, but then you need a strong opposition. So at the very least, you don't have carte blanche.
Yeah. No,
I share that 100%. I agree with you.
Yeah, and so if you end up with any party, well, I think we all know which one I'm talking about. If we end up with any party having a majority of like 100 say Labour end up getting 450+ seats, we have not ever been in that kind of territory before, and so it really is an unknown, I think. So that does make me a little bit nervous from a country point of view. In terms of stuff I'm looking forward to, I really like seeing it when Christians are thinking about who they're voting for based on what has been put forward. And I guess it's something which I really care about is Christians not just saying, oh, look, I always do this, but actually looking at what each party stands for and what they're saying they will do, and looking at their local candidates and actually thinking about who they're voting for. Recognising we have only got one vote and it does not break the election if you vote one way or a different way. But I do love to see Christians looking to love God with all of their minds, as well as their hearts, souls and strengths. What about for you?
I share the same points, I think. Certainly on the thing I'm afraid of, I think it would be along very similar lines. I think we want to have a credible opposition, and so we should pray to that end. And I think also when it comes to what I'm looking forward to, alongside the rest of the manifestos coming out and actually being able to see what the parties are, what their platforms are, as much as I've been down on the TV debates as well, I'm also beginning to look forward to the actual election night itself, because that moment when Big Ben goes and the exit poll comes and then some of what's wrapped up in that, I find it very exciting. And I can't promise I'll stay up for the whole night, especially if it's a foregone conclusion. Then I'm kind of like, what's the point? But I can certainly promise I'll stay up till 10 and hopefully beyond that as well.
Do you mean we're not planning on live streaming as the election results come in?
You can live stream if you want to, Peter. No problem with me. I'm just saying
I'm getting some overtime in.
Probably won't be there. No, that's really, really, really helpful. And again, just to emphasise a number of things. So engaGE24.org.uk. If you haven't done our policy quiz yet, take our policy quiz. Even if you have done it, why not take it again? Why not do it in light of the manifestos?
Well, yes, that's what I was going to say is over the next few days, we will kind of just check over all the questions and all of the answers in order to make sure that it is fully representative of what parties have said in their manifestos.
Fantastic. Also, if your church or churches known to you are involved in putting on a hustings in the next few weeks, go to our election website, engaGE24.org.uk, and you can register your hustings on our interactive map. So we want to build up a picture of hustings, church-based hustings taking place all over the country. And then finally, don't forget our prayer resources and also our interviews with 3 Christian candidates, one for Labour, one for Lib Dems, one for Conservatives, Miriam Cates for the Tories, Tim Farron for the Liberal Democrats, and Sir Stephen Timms for Labour. Fantastic. They're doing really well on YouTube, so let's keep going. That is a brilliant way to hear from Christians actively at the coalface who are out there even now campaigning, Peter. Isn't that exciting?
It is exciting.
It is exciting.
I guess one other thing, actually, which is worth thinking about,
please,
and that is it. I think it is the 18th of July by which you are of June by which you are supposed to have registered to vote.
Yes, yes.
So we do have a video on our YouTube channel about how you can vote, which covers things like registering to vote. But yeah, do make sure that you get that done. I had to register again a couple of weeks ago because since the last election, I have changed where I'm living. So really didn't take very long at all. Probably lasted about a couple of minutes filling in that form, but do make sure that you get that done.
Yeah, fantastic. And as always, if you have questions, anything you'd like us to wrestle with or to talk about on this very podcast, then please just get in contact with us via social media, whether that's via YouTube, whether that's via X or Facebook or Instagram. Just let us know. You can also get in contact with us via the engaGE24 website. Just find the contact details at the bottom and reach out to us. We would love that. So, Peter, we've come to the end of another engaGE24 podcast. What's your overriding feeling about this podcast?
Well, I very much enjoy doing it with you.
God, oh my God. You've caught me by surprise.
You will notice you didn't then follow that up by saying, well, of course, I really enjoy doing that with you too.
Forgive me. No, I don't get many compliments, and so I'm just processing at the moment. That's very unusual, but it goes without saying that it's a great pleasure, great privilege for me to be in the same room as Isaac. So yeah, it's great. Yeah. No, it's lovely to do it with you as well. Great to have this opportunity to talk, and we'll be back very soon with our next engaGE24 podcast. Until then, Peter, goodbye.
See you soon.